This FPV monitor only costs $32, but is it any good? We're going to find out. First, we'll look at the specs, and then I'll tell you what my impression was of using the monitor, and finally we'll talk about whether it's something that you should consider buying. Let's start with the specs. This monitor has a 4.3-inch LCD screen with a resolution of 480 by 272. It's powered by a built-in LiPo battery and charged with an included cable. It has a single video receiver with an RP SMA connector and an included dipole antenna. The monitor only has two controls, a power switch on the side and a single button on the back to change band and channel. So pretty simple specs, nothing too crazy to talk about there. Let me tell you what I thought of it when I used it. So when I first pulled this monitor out of the box, I'll say that I did really like the size and shape of the monitor. It's not too bulky, it feels good to hold in my hands, and it's a great size for putting in a backpack or keeping on a desk. No issues there. I really liked the spring-loaded sunshade. It helps protect the screen when it's not in use, and it does help in bright sun with making it a little bit easier to see that screen. I would have liked to have seen a tripod mount on the bottom of the monitor, and there wasn't one included. That was a little bit of a downside. I will say that I didn't really like the proprietary charging port on the side of this screen. I would have much preferred something like a micro USB port. I've got the included charging cable, but now I have to be responsible for that cable, and I'm not sure if I'm ready for that type of commitment. I was also disappointed in the RP SMA connector for the antenna. None of my other goggles use RP SMA, which means that none of my nicer antennas worked with this monitor. I only had one other antenna that would fit this monitor, and I actually ended up using the stock dipole antenna because it folds down for transport. It would have been a lot nicer if I could have used one of my nice stubby antennas, but I wasn't about to spend the money on a new one just to put on this monitor. The big thing that stuck out to me about this screen though was the controls, or the lack thereof. It's simple, but I would say that it's too simple. I would have really liked to have seen more controls. I mean, would it have killed them to add a second button to go down in channels as well as up? There's also no brightness or image controls, which is a little bit concerning. You have to hope that you like the image you get from this screen. And unfortunately, I have to say that some of those concerns were proved true whenever I actually did turn the screen on and use it. The channel selection is just a number. So A is the 10s, B is the 20s, and so on, which is a little bit confusing. You also can't skip directly to the band you want to use. You have to just incrementally go up through the channels. This means that if you're on R2 and accidentally switch the monitor to R3, you have to go all the way back around to get back to R2. And that requires you to press that button about 40 times. That's extremely frustrating, and it is pretty problematic, especially if you have multiple drones on different channels. When you do get to the correct channel, you'll realize that the screen is pretty low resolution. The resolution of the screen is approximately 1/4 that of the Eachine EV800, but the screen is the same physical size, which means that the image appears blurry and pixelated compared to other goggles you might have used. The colors and image also really aren't that great. The screen has poor dynamic range, and it seems like dark areas are way too dark and light areas get really washed out and kind of dominate the image. There's no controls to adjust that, so you're just kind of stuck with it. I recorded the screen so you could get an idea of what that looks like and how it compares to the image that I'm getting from my higher end goggles. You can see that when I fly into this dark room, the light coming in through the window totally dominates the image, and the rest of the room appears extremely dark, and it's extremely hard to see what's going on. I was pleasantly surprised with the video signal I got from this monitor though. I had fairly low expectations since it only has a single video receiver and I was using a pretty cheap antenna, but it performed well in the tests I did. Now I will say, I only tried this at short range. The first test I did was in my backyard, which isn't that big, and I'll say that the monitor performed very well. I didn't feel like I had any signal dropouts, and it seemed like it was performing just about as well as my more expensive goggles. So that was great to see. It's also been really rainy here, and so I didn't get the chance to fly very far away and really haven't gotten to fly outside much at all. But I did fly this inside my house to get an idea of how it performed with obstacles. And inside the house, it actually performed very well. So no matter where I went in the house, I didn't ever really lose signal with this monitor. It seemed like it was keeping up pretty well with the Cobra X goggles I was using. So in that environment, I'd say the signal was great. For short range and indoor flying, you really won't have a problem with this monitor. Now, of course, it is still a single video receiver, so as soon as you get outdoors and start getting farther away or get around more obstacles, it's going to start falling down. This isn't magic, and it's not going to be able to keep up with an expensive set of goggles that's using diversity or a mix module or anything like that. But if you're just flying close to where you are, I think it could do pretty well. Battery life also seemed good to me. The monitor has a reasonably accurate battery indicator, and it did let me know when it was getting low and when it eventually shut off. So it gave a little bit of warning, which was nice. But the battery life seemed perfectly fine to me. It lasted a couple of hours, I think, and I definitely didn't come away from it with an impression that the battery died quickly or anything like that. So no concerns there. So that was my experience using the monitor, but now let's talk about whether it's worth the $32 for you. Honestly, the screen and controls make this monitor pretty hard to love. One use I had in mind was as a spectator screen, but I don't think this monitor is great for that purpose. The screen is so low resolution that it really doesn't give you a very good image of the camera. Analog FPV cameras are already not that great, and we want spectators to have a good impression of FPV and to have the best experience they possibly can watching you fly. So having a screen with this low of resolution and this poor of an image just really isn't that great. The controls would also be pretty clunky for a spectator to use. I'm imagining a situation where you're out flying with several people and someone might say, oh hey, this drone's on channel A5. And whereas a spectator might have been able to figure out a normal band and channel control scheme, just having these numbers is maybe a little bit confusing for them, and they might end up just having to press buttons until they can find the right channel. So I think that's a downside. And finally, the single receiver in this monitor means that you're not going to get anything close to the range of what you'd get with a higher end set of goggles. I know that if I had a spectator using the screen while I was flying, I would quickly outrun the range of this monitor, and so I would either need to stay close to my position or the spectator would just not be able to see after a short time. So for those reasons, I don't really think it's great for that purpose. Another use might be to have this as a monitor on your workbench, something to use when you're configuring a Betaflight OSD or diagnosing problems. I think this could work okay for that, but it does have a couple of issues that you might want to be aware of. The first is that the low resolution means that it's actually fairly hard to read the OSD elements, so that's a little bit annoying. The other problem is that the single button channel control makes it very annoying to switch between channels, and that could be a problem if you have different drones that are on different channels, or in some cases you're not even sure what channel your drone is on, and so you have to kind of scroll through and find it. And I feel like all of that is more annoying with this control scheme. And you might also be wondering if you could fly with this monitor. Now personally, I don't really like flying with a monitor, but I think even if I did, I wouldn't recommend this one. First, the poor dynamic range of the screen is going to make this pretty hard to fly with. You saw what it looked like when I went into a dark room, and I just feel like it'd be challenging to have a good experience unless your lighting conditions are perfect. You also only have that single receiver, which means that your signal is not going to be that great as soon as you get more than a little distance away from yourself. I think that if all you do is fly at short range or indoors in a well-lit area, I think this could be okay. But if you're able to stretch your budget at all past this, I would definitely want something better if this is going to be your only FPV screen. So overall, should you buy it? I'd say probably not. If you can stretch your budget even a little bit, there are much better options. There's another monitor called the FPV Monitor that's $72, but it offers a much better feature set. It has a better screen, diversity of receivers, and a DVR. That'd be a much better monitor if you had to pick. The Eoshin EV800 is $60, and it's got a better screen than this monitor, and it can also act as FPV goggles. Those would both be great choices. If this is literally all you can afford, then I think it could be all right, but I'd really try to stretch to that $60 to get the Eoshin EV800. That's what I started with. They're great starter goggles, and they're going to perform much better than this monitor does. Those are my thoughts. Like I said, interesting product, definitely a cheap price point, but I have a hard time recommending it. If you are interested in seeing this monitor or any of those alternatives I mentioned, I've got links down in the description, so check those out. And, I hope this review was helpful for you. Feel free to leave a comment if you have questions or thoughts about this monitor. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.